Welcome to You Brew Kombucha. Today we're going to talk about whether or not SCOBY size matters. A lot of homebrewers ask me if SCOBY size matters when it comes to brewing kombucha. And in general, I would say no. And so I want to clarify our terminology here a little bit because SCOBY is an acronym that stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast. And that culture, those bacteria and yeast, actually technically live within the liquid itself. So that's whether you're calling that kombucha starter liquid, kombucha tea, starter tea, that is actually where that symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast live. Many homebrewers have also taken to calling this physical mat that's floating at the top of the vessel. A lot of homebrewers also call that the SCOBY. So just for vernacular reasons, I use the term somewhat interchangeably. Whenever I brew a batch of kombucha, I use both starter tea and a SCOBY or a pellicle, which is the more accurate scientific name for it. But in general, the question that I get from homebrewers is, for this mat, this pellicle, does size matter when you're just getting started brewing a batch of kombucha? What if your pellicle is only half the size of this, or if it's super thin? Is that okay to brew with? And my answer is yes. Honestly, the pellicle size, the SCOBY mat size doesn't really matter as much as the volume and strength of the starter tea. And I talk about this in a lot of my videos, but the real important factor here is that there's enough starter tea and strong starter liquid to kickstart the fermentation process, drop the pH of the sweet tea, and get that fermentation going. So that's actually the liquid that's doing the majority of the legwork there, more so than the physical pellicle. So if you're buying some starter tea or a starter kit to make your own homemade batch of kombucha, the thing that I would prioritize more so than the size of the SCOBY is the volume of starter tea that it comes with. Make sure that it comes with at least 2 cups if you're planning on brewing a gallon of kombucha. Some kombucha recipes out there say that you only need 1 cup of starter tea to brew a gallon batch of kombucha, but I've actually found that the more starter tea you put into the brew, the more resilient the kombucha is, the better tasting it is, and the faster it tends to ferment. And I'm not saying that speed is necessarily key here. I actually always rely on the taste of the kombucha to determine when I move on to the next phase of fermentation and to determine when it's ready to drink. It is important to note that the volume of starter tea is actually what greatly impacts how fast the pH will drop to a safe level that inhibits harmful pathogens from coming into the brew. I tend to double the recommended amount. Instead of 1 cup, use 2 cups for a gallon of kombucha, and just make sure that you have enough of that starter tea to add to your first batch of kombucha. Now, if the pellicle itself happens to be half the size or a quarter of the size, I don't really worry about it so much as long as you have a good volume of starter tea. So SCOBY size to me doesn't really matter. On the flip side, I also get the question a lot of, does SCOBY size matter after you've finished fermentation? So if you have fermented a gallon of kombucha and you've let it hang out for a week or 2, and at this point you're ready to bottle it, you want to move on to the next phase, whether you're drinking it, whether you're flavoring it and bottling it for carbonation. And the question is, at that point, my SCOBY hasn't grown, or it's just a super thin SCOBY, does that matter? So if you want the answer to that question, I'm actually going to point you over to another video of mine where I explore that topic in a little bit more detail. So I will put a link to that video down in the description box below. But otherwise, I hope this was helpful information for you. If you have other questions about the kombucha brewing process, definitely check out my website, youbrewkombucha.com. I have basically a table of contents there with links to all of the different topics that I explore both on my website and here on YouTube. And I also have links to all of my favorite recommended brewing materials and a link to the Kombucha Crafter's Logbook, which I published a little while ago. So if you're interested in checking that out, head over to youbrewkombucha.com. Thanks for watching. Happy brewing!